Hey guys, welcome to the Lunge and Lift podcast. Today we're doing part two of our most recent Q&A, finishing off the ones we didn't get time for in part one. We're going to talk through switching from classes to programming for yourself or open gym, sort of self-driven training. We're going to cover off static stretching and also how you can tailor your training even, when you have a job involving manual labor. Then we're going to trade off sleep versus nutrition versus training and how to prioritize them depending on what's going on in your life. And finish with a nice bit of analysis on CrossFit versus building resilience for life or any GPP. So before we get into it, as always, big thank you to our sponsor, Wit Fitness. Please check them out at wit-fitness.com and use discount code LL15 to get 15% off your purchase. But first things first, let's get into it. Rob, what does your training look like at the moment?
Is that you asking?
It's me asking. Yeah.
Oh, cheers, mate. Oh.
Yeah.
Training is mixed at the moment. Been doing swimming, cycling, running. To be honest with you, I've barely cycled. I've reduced running, which is not a good idea, and I've just been doubling down on swimming. I'm just genuinely scared of not finishing because I know once I'm out in the water of my track, so training for a triathlon.
Not finishing well, yeah.
Yeah, so training for a triathlon, I've got an Olympic distance, which is a 1,500 meter swim, and that is mid-July. So because the most I've done is 750 in a race, and I nearly drowned, and I was pretty much the last person out of the water. I don't want that to happen again. So I've just been doubling down on swimming and just pretty much let everything else go to the wayside. Not necessarily a good thing, but I have got a bit better open water swimming. That's the main thing. And I'm going twice a week, open water, one coaching session, one open swim, and just getting comfortable in a wetsuit in the water, which is really weird because I'm not scared of it. But clearly there's something there which just makes me incredibly uneasy. And I think it's just the fear of drowning. Even though I'm in a wetsuit which floats, I don't know what it is. But it's been really interesting. It's been a really interesting because it's literally the past two open water swims, I've just felt a little bit better. I've still been like the coaching one. I was still pretty much the last athlete round everything, but I'm okay with that. We touched on it in previous episodes about like the ego and stuff. I have no ego when it comes to swimming in the open water. I'm just like, I'm ready to I just want to get better. So I'll be last and just keep doing it. And also, I really, really, really miss strength training. So I decided to do some lifting the other day. And I think it's just because, when you're not doing something that much, and it's what I really enjoy, I'm really getting an itch for it. I'm just like, I need to lift, but I've got some really bad DOMs today from some walking around. So what about you, mate?
Well, I was just thinking, you said that there. You love working your weaknesses, and I think we're very different in that respect. I avoid them like the plague. So my training is very similar to how it normally is. A big focus on calisthenics. So continuing to work on the single arm pull up. I just find like bang for buck, it gives you a lot in terms of great upper body stimulus, nice bit of skill acquisition, nice bit of problem solving to tackle all the different aspects of all the components required, and also working on the front lever and towards the iron cross, which are both very, very difficult for me.
I've done a front lever.
You've done a front lever, have you?
And a back lever.
Is it a video or a photo?
I got video.
Okay. All right. There you go. Just a little kick up the arse. Okay. I'm going to double down on that then.
Yeah. Yes.
So those are probably the main focus, and playing sports. So it's nice that squash is back open. So my squash league has restarted, and that's sort of, I would like to say I'm doing some conditioning for it. I have been doing the speed, agility, quickness stuff for football on the weekends whenever I can, but summer weekends seem to be taken up with football and socializing. Now everything's open again, so slipping a little bit, but trying to hang on to that little bit of lower body and conditioning stimulus, and the occasional run, again, just as things have got busier work-wise and socially, the run seems to be the thing that gets squeezed out. So yeah, there is the back of mind goal of a sub 25k, which will happen at some point. It's just when the stars align, and
Yeah.
maybe just it'll take another lockdown for that one to get ticked off. But
It's
don't want to
funny.
jinx it.
It just got me thinking there. Where you say, obviously, I like to work on my weaknesses, and I really do. But I had a thought the other day, and it was, I wonder if it's just because I know I'm not ever going to be great at anything, so I'm just happy to be good at a lot of things, so I can afford to be crap at something and get good at it rather than great at it. And I just wonder if it's to do with that I can afford to just set, which I do wonder though, if I would have doubled down a bit of powerlifting, that if I would have stuck with that, maybe, because I was relatively alright at that. So, but at the same time, it's because I now look at the person basically got me into powerlifting, Adam, and how his strength is, because he's obviously just continued, and he's incredibly strong, and he's just like, I do wonder what would have happened there, but I guess it's that trade-off of that and asking yourself why you're doing it, and if you're doing it for fun, and that's it. So maybe let's get into it then. So we've got a question here from Ben. I have been doing CrossFit classes for 2 years and have now started using Open Gym more. I now want to start programming for myself. Where do I start? Great question.
Great question. Obviously, Ben hasn't listened to episodes 47, 48, and 49, where we go deep on this, the programming series, in how to set your goals and how to structure a program. I think the fundamental pieces here are being clear on what you're training for, what you want to move towards, especially if you're doing CrossFit. Is it all-round CrossFit performance competitively? Is it being fit for life, which we'll come on to with a later question? Or do you have specific areas of CrossFit that you're trying to get better at? So once you've established your SMART goals and you know what you're working towards, then you almost reverse engineer it for how much training time do I have in the week, and what's the most important priority in my training, and just making sure you're getting a stimulus in each session to move you towards some of those goals. There's loads of good programs out there which cover a lot of bases, but I think I would always err on the side of underdoing it to start with and then slowly ramping up, then trying to fit in 3 different programs, a strength program, a cardio program, and a gymnastics program on top of each other, which is the classic CrossFit mistake. And then each of those programs was probably designed to be done on its own as your own only training, and you're effectively doing 3 people's worth of training per week, and that's a recipe for disaster. So as little as possible to get the stimulus and then slowly build up would always be my recommendation there.
Yeah, and so that programming series we did was really good, where we did cover all these little details in a lot more depth. But I'd also recommend that if you're just wanting to just play around and depends how serious you are with the programming, but you could just follow the similar structure to what the class was doing. It might have been, say, a strength piece followed by a bit of conditioning if you're just looking for that general CrossFit, say, just doing something in an hour. But ask yourself just why you've stopped doing the classes, and if it's to progress and get better, then it's definitely worth doubling down, as you said, about programming for yourself, but maybe looking for a coach, paying for a coach, and learning a bit more of individualized programming rather than group programming. So it's just some thoughts there. Question number 2, static stretching, yes or no? I like how blunt this is.
No.
Okay, I love it.
Next.
Right, cool. Okay.
No.
Would you just like to dive a little bit deeper into the no? I know you're you're not an advocate of static stretching at all. So so let's maybe start with why someone might think static stretching is what they should be doing.
Yeah. I think people do static stretching because they think that flexibility is something that everyone should be striving towards. And I would reframe that to be good range of motion in the movements that matter to you is what you should be working towards, rather than just flexibility for flexibility's sake. So that can be achieved in more effective ways in less time and less effort. So if that's what you're after, if you want good range of motion in your movements, then pursue that. At the very least, pulse your stretches rather than holding them. Everything we do is a training stimulus, so your body is always adapting to what you ask it to do. In a static stretch, you're holding a muscle in a lengthened state and asking it to relax. You almost never want that. You want your muscle to be able to contract from the lengthened state. So the pulse stretch teaches the muscle that it can go a little bit further, but then this is how it comes back, it contracts. So at the very least, pulsed versions of the same stretches are better. If you want to improve range of motion in a given movement, then making the mobility exercise more like the movement is a faster way to achieve that. So say you want to improve your squat depth, doing mobilizations and stretches in a squat-like position will be way better than doing a random hip stretch, that something that feels tight gets a stretch out of. So I think, yeah, if I was going to have to come down one side of the fence, yes or no for static stretching, it's a definite no. And there aren't many arguments for why you would use static stretching that I buy into, because every outcome that people seek through static stretching, I believe, can be achieved in another way more effectively.
Nice, I like it. I'd challenge you ever so slightly on one part, and
Go
that's
on.
the where, as a static stretch for the ability to down regulate your heart rate and an opportunity to say do something that's not too skillful or too much thought. So where this comes from is at the end of a class, right? So I'm thinking about the class just because the first question is talking about class. So quite often there's at the end of the class you do things, everyone's packed their way and bring everyone back together, maybe get them into a form of stretch of some sort. Not always the best idea. However, beyond just the stretch itself, it's an opportunity for everyone to like review the workout, talk about the workout, maybe let their heart rate come down for just jumping straight in the shower and going off to work. And I don't think the stretch is necessary. So this is where I can't, it's like I'm challenging it, but I'm not. It's like, because I understand, because for instance, do you know what? No, this is the reason why. Because if I was coaching a class and I said to everyone at the end of class, right, everyone lie down on your back and relax, you'd get looked at, even though you're the coach, and you're just like, I'm not here to lie down, even though that is a probably more a valuable thing to do post end of class when you've done your, just to essentially you're about to go off to your high stressful job potentially, to just go and breathe and relax, like that thing that I do at the end of yoga. So it's like the fact they do it there must be some case for it. So
Yeah.
to rather than say like with some rather than just lying there, maybe I say a pigeon stretch, a stretch of some sort that where people are generally quite tight because it makes them feel a bit better. Oh, okay, I have a tight hip. This feels quite nice. This must be quite good. So the feedback loop is quite a positive thing. So I think as a psychological performance enhancer or thing, I think there's a case for it, but probably more in the class setting than anything else. In an individual's time, I think time could be used more effectively as well.
Cool. Okay. So I have definitely done that
Yep.
in like years past when I was leading classes, but I would challenge back and say, if we know what we want from that is people to reduce their heart rate, to downregulate the nervous system, and to ease off tight muscles, all of those things can be achieved without static stretching. At the very least, doing pulsed versions of the same stretches, and like the heart rate reduction and de-stressing, like you say, can be done with the breathing. So we're essentially just using old logic that static stretching after training is a good thing as an excuse to put in that part of the session, whereas
It's buying, isn't
the
it?
real it's a little bait and switch, really. It's like we're static stretching you, but actually we're just bringing your heart rate down, de-stressing you, and reviewing the workout. So we can do that as a technique to trick people into getting what we want, or we can just find another way. Doing pulse stretches is the easiest substitution there, in that they're then training their muscles to contract from that range of motion rather than just completely switch off. And I believe you can still downregulate the nervous system by doing so. So I think it is just a bit of a hangover from old fitness bro science
Yeah.
that it's what you should be doing, but
agree.
you never really want your muscles to just completely lose tension. So that's my 2 cents anyway.
Yeah, as I say, I think we're both singing off the same hymn sheet there, and I think we touched on it in a couple of episodes back where we said about with the strength training, and you've got to try and trick people into lifting lighter loads, and it's that same thing. Is because and again, we're talking about a classy environment. Once someone's finished a workout, you're lucky if they put their kit away, which most of them do in a CrossFit class, which is great. But to have them there for a moment, they're normally bang, shower, gone, done, and it's like. It's to get them in to stretch, because it's like same as when people think there's magic food to lose weight. It's there's a common misconception which is out there, which is static stretching is a good thing. So if you're telling people, cool, we're going to get you in now, and you're doing it for an ulterior motive, but they feel kind of good doing it. It's like you could be doing better, but you're doing what you can, and I'm all for. I think if you have some time to look into it yourself, definitely look into it, and maybe talk to Ash a bit more about this, because I know he loves to dive into this even deeper. But I think my case for static stretching is more the holistic side rather than the actual neurological adaptation side of this is what you need to be doing. So I guess it's a kind of win-win, right? So, okay. Not episode. Question number 3 from CY Fitness. Been mixing labouring and training. Have you trained clients like this? What was hard? Loved it. To the point.
Good. Yeah. Yes is the answer. Not specific labourers, but people who've got physically demanding jobs. And I think just being aware of that overall physical tax on the body and managing it with your training is the challenge here, because obviously most people who have sedentary jobs, there's not too much added to the equation from a physical recovery point of view, whereas somebody is laboring hard, lifting and carrying heavy stuff, that does take its toll on the body. And so you'll have to accommodate for that recovery wise. In terms of programming, I think having optional components to the sessions is how you manage it, because the nature of laborious jobs is that there will be physical toil, but you won't know exactly how much there will be on a given day, depending on how work's going. So on one day, you might have a really heavy day at work, and then you need to adjust your training. On another day, there'll be very minimal toiling at work, so you can train a little bit harder. So for me, you've almost got your must-haves in training, so the real fundamental meat and potatoes that are going to get you the majority of your results, and then you've got optional extras which you can add in to get you a little bit more if you have the energy from your leftover from work. But they're the first things to be cut if work's being especially taxing and you just need to recover. How about you, mate? You've got experience in the construction world, so.
All right, mate. I was in an office. I weren't necessarily. Actually, to be fair, I did go and walk around the site, but that was about it. But I have done some labouring stuff in the past. Worked in many jobs over the years, and it is challenging. Do you know what though? I actually find it easier to manage training around that than a office worker, because a lot of time office workers' stress is psychological and external, so you can't measure it on the body. Whereas with a labourer's job, it's a lot more physical. So you can say, today I have done this. Not saying that a labourer's job won't have necessarily other outside stresses in life, because they probably do, but an office worker's stress you can't see. So it's what they may is, if they feel bad in a session, it's like, why am I feeling bad today? I've not done anything all day. Whereas a labourer then, or someone that's got a labourer's job, feels bad in a session. Oh, do you know what? I've lifted loads of stuff today. That's probably why. So I think, just to harness onto what Ash was saying there, having your must-haves. I think keeping it simple, as in making sure you do your big stuff that you want to make sure you're getting done, that gets you closer towards what you're training for. And with those optional extras, what's good is if I know, and from experience, that you can't always predict the week, but most jobs you'll have a rough idea on a week what kind of tasks you're going to be doing, so you know what's more strenuous than not from just experience. So if you know towards the start of the week you're going to be a lot more taxing than towards the back end of the week, where you normally finish early on a Friday and stuff like that, you might want to do your extra fluff work that you didn't do on a Monday and Tuesday towards the back end of the week, because that's where you have more time, you can recover. And then what I'd ask is, are you then recovering from that, or are you going for beers on a Friday after? So then, because if you're going for beers after training on a Friday, sweet, you've done your training. PX Nutrition actually done a good post about alcohol and training, so do check that out on their Instagram. But basically they were saying that for the general public, that you can have a couple of drinks. It's not going to be great for you, but just throw it in. Unless you're a pro athlete, then it's not obviously necessarily ideal. But for general, crack on. However, you do need to take that into consideration, that your recovery will be dampened, everything. And if you already got a strenuous job, you're just creating a debt that you might not be able to pay back. So just be conscious of that. So the fluff work is like, save it for the extra stuff if you have the time, and if you've got the energy, really, and if you want to do it. So.
Yeah, and as always, I think focusing on your key outcome metrics. If it's going well, it's going well. If it's not, then something needs to change. So maybe you're doing too much, maybe you're not doing enough, but always correlating back from the outcome to the inputs.
Yeah, and also leaving like you feel like you could have done a bit more is a good thing. Like I think we have this misconception. I say this to clients all the time, and it's like, especially when I'm looking at from, say, like the stress on their body from outside sources, and I say, like, let's hit this today, and they've hit like a good, say, set of 5 on a deadlift, and I know they still got another, say, 7 kilos. It's like, why are we going to do that? Why not leave today injury free, feeling great, stuff like that? Like, leave a little bit in the tank, especially if you got uncertain stresses coming at you for the week and you're not sure. You're in a much better position there than, I'd say, just to end yourself every workout just because you can. So just some thoughts. So right, into Matt's question. How an athlete should prioritize sleep versus nutrition versus training across a day/week? With limited hours in a day, should certain types of athletes prioritize these in a different order? And long term, is it best to sacrifice one before the other on a consistent basis if necessary?
Oof.
I like that.
Big one. So sleep, nutrition and training for an athlete, like Matt takes his training very seriously, are all crucial and all essential, I would say. So it's very difficult to say that one isn't important, because they all are very important. And I think I'm going to slip into life coach mode now, in life as well as training, there are always trade-offs and opportunity costs. So knowing what your priorities are will help make these decisions. So for an athlete at different stages in their season or having different training goals will slightly affect the relative importance of each of these 3 areas. So if you're bulking, for example, then nutrition is paramount. You can't get bigger if you don't eat enough. And it's simple as that. So if like, it's a horrible trade-off to have, but if you're faced with the decision
I'd
of
add, sorry,
sleeping,
I'd add
go on.
training into that. If you're bulking,
Yeah,
you're like, if you're physically trying to get better, training surely. It's weird. Bulking is one of those ones, in my opinion, like training and nutrition have to go hand in hand,
yeah,
because
agree.
without either, you either get fat or you just don't get big.
Yeah,
Do you know what I mean?
agree.
So sorry,
Yeah,
I just went
yeah,
to
agree.
just because it was just a point as you said that, and I know that's what you meant, but yeah,
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah, exactly. But I guess on a it's difficult to answer this because on a one-off occasion is very different to on a consistent basis. So if you're constantly prioritizing food over training and you never train and always eat, then yeah, you're going to get pretty fat. But equally, if you always prioritize training over nutrition, you're never going to get big because you haven't got the building blocks. Check out our podcast on nutrition for gaining muscle and training for gaining muscle to go through the nuts and bolts of how that process works. So long term, you can't just sack off one in favor of another. And I think it's almost on a rotation basis. Like because I ate enough and didn't train this week, next week I'm going to train more and maybe let the nutrition slip. But
Yeah, and then
you
sleep gets
if you get
affected.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a difficult one to answer in an absolute way because depending on how well the other two are going will dictate how much sacrifice you can actually make for the third one. I think from a lifestyle and health perspective, sleep would probably be the number one for me, just because it's so beneficial across the board.
Yeah.
But again, I'm not ever going to say that nutrition and training or exercise aren't important. If you've got a competition around the corner, then sleep's probably going to suffer anyway because you're stressed and anxious about it. So just being accepting of that is important, and keeping your training appropriate rather than sticking 100% to plan is probably the most important thing. So all your motor patterns are fresh and you feel in good form rather than letting your training slip to get 8 hours. I think in those days and maybe 1 or 2 weeks leading up to a competition, an athlete will generally prefer to feel like they're performing well rather than they're well slept.
Because
But
how
there's
much
always,
extra say strength or anything you're going to gain in like 2 weeks? The reality is the work is done. So then
yeah,
it's about how good can you go into the competition rather than
yeah. But I think, yeah, a bit of a dodge here, but there's always going to be tons of caveats and within reasons around these. But knowing what your immediate goals are and what your long-term priorities are, I think will help you answer. But ultimately, none of them are unimportant. It's just the relative importance that you can be aware of, and any of them could be the right one to prioritize or deprioritize.
I think understanding establishing your minimum,
Mm,
your bare minimum across the board. What is the least amount of sleep I can just about get away if I don't want to be there, but what is, if it has to suffer, what is the bare minimum? Same as the training, as you mentioned there about some movement patterns, like is it good enough for me to turn up and feel good at the end of the session, still doing similar to what I can, maybe the load is not there, and the nutrition, you need to be hitting a minimum of, say, your maintenance that you're trying to do. Say if you're struggling to, you missed a meal and you really don't want this, say, 2,000 calorie shake at the end of the day, as a not a good example, but an example, then maybe it's a day that you're in a deficit, but you need to then take that into consideration for the next day. But it doesn't have to mean you have to have the next day where you got that 1,000 calories that you missed. You might then add 250 every day for 4 days, and you've then brought it back up, because you have to look at a macro level, with that wide-eyed lens, not necessarily always the day, as Ash was saying there. So focus on your minimums. And also listen to episode 27 where we had nutrition for performance with Liam. That was a good one where we dived into. And we did episode 33 where we discussed some recovery considerations. So you might not be able to sleep more, but maybe improve the quality of your sleep. So then that kind of gets away with your bare minimum. So maybe if you're getting, say, 6-7 hours, you're like, cool, I'm now going to get everything optimal as I can in those 6-7 hours, so you can really gain as much as you can from them. But that's what I'd suggest.
nice.
Lastly, Mr. Harry Seymour, great question here. CrossFit versus building resilience for life or any activity slash general physical preparedness, GPP. I thought this was a really good question because
Mm,
obviously CrossFit is in a way advertised as a functional methodology that gets you prepared for life. That's
yeah,
what it is. It's GPP. It's obviously gone a little bit far from what it started out as, and it's now essentially a sport. And the classes may have quite a lot of classes maybe have geared a bit more towards now the sports side of it rather than the GPP side of it.
yep.
But what are your thoughts on this?
Loads, yes. I think
Yeah.
this could potentially be a full episode in its own right. But we'll try to keep it short for the sake of my battery. Um, we have lots to consider here. I think, like you say, the distinguishing between whether you're doing CrossFit for competitive reasons or for health, lifestyle, and GPP reasons is the fundamental issue. Because at its extreme, when you're doing CrossFit at the highest level, I would say it detracts from your longevity, because you're like any high level sport, you're training at your edge, you're trying to eke out as much performance as you can. So there's a high stress on your body, and your priority is performance, which is at the expense of your health at the extreme. So there is a big patch where they overlap, where improving your performance will improve your health, but there is an inflection point when actually you're not training yourself so hard, and you're, even though CrossFit is very varied, you're still specializing. So there are competition movements that you have to do which you are specializing your body for, so the generalness of your physical preparedness actually does go down. So at in the middle of the graph is sort of the sweet spot. But once you start going extreme and you start lifting super heavy weights with the barbell and you start doing loads of handstand push-ups and things like that, your body's becoming specialized for that sport. And anytime you specialize towards something, you're also specializing away from something else. So in our last episode, I think we talked about stiffness of spine in powerlifting. If you're getting really strong with a barbell, you are training your back to get stiff, which is positive for heavy deadlifts, but then it's not so good for back bends and lots of spinal flexion. And this is a bit of the contradiction of CrossFit, is that you can't have both. Like if you're optimizing for one, you are trading off against the other. So for the average person, doing a little bit of CrossFit, I think, is an awesome thing. And as a training system, it's very all encompassing. It probably has more variation in it than any other training system that's widely available out there. But every system has its limitations, every training system. And to cover all the possible movements that the human body can achieve is an incredible ask, because there are so many. So there are always going to be things that get slightly neglected. And I think everyone's probably bored of hearing me talk about the three planes of motion and the fact that most training specializes on the sagittal plane, forwards, back, up, and down. And life is triplanar. Life is mostly unilateral, whereas CrossFit is very focused around the barbell in the
Yeah.
main, which is bilateral and sagittal dominant. So at the very least, adding in that those three planes of motion more often, I think, will actually build better resilience for life. And GPP is a funny one, because general physical preparedness can mean different things to different people. Like being generally prepared is, by being non-specific, it makes it harder. Like I struggle. If somebody says they want to be generally fitter, it's a way harder problem to solve than someone says, I want to compete in weightlifting and I want to snatch as heavy as possible. That to me gives everything focus and direction, and it's a very simple problem to solve. Whereas if it's non-specific and vague, then the prescriptions are not as easy to come by. So even if they can get clear on the fact that they want to play with their kids when they become a grandparent, or they want to be able to go on a long bike ride, whatever it is, that makes your training simpler. And it's probably not the answer people want, but CrossFit gets you good at CrossFit, generally speaking. And it's great until it's not. So I think that's, enough from me.
I love it. I think that's really good. CrossFit is great until it's not, and I think, and it's not that CrossFit's problem. It's because
Yeah.
then you become really, say, good at it, and you want to get better, and
Yeah.
you go, do you know what? I need to be better. So then it's our human flaw of progression. Basically, we're always seeking out the better way to, what can I do to improve here, which is great, because that's training. And
Yeah.
you know, the mentioning there about the general physical preparedness and about what is it you're being prepared for, because as you mentioned about being able to play with your kids, or when you're a grandparent or whatever, it's like that's just basic level strength. As long as you move often, you're not going to lose that necessary range of motion. And that's it. I think it's being exposed to, say, these, as you say, triplanar movements. You know, it took CrossFit till what was it? It was 2017 with the first dumbbell. So
Yep.
do you know what I mean? So it took
Yeah.
that long for a dumbbell to come into CrossFit. So that I pretty much say a unilateral movement. I'm not saying there is no other unilateral movements in CrossFit, because there are,
Yeah.
but it took that long for it to then, you know, take that stuff. So just think about where CrossFit's going to be in, say, another 5 years' time. Because
Yeah.
when you look at it's when you're in a class environment, it does depend obviously on the box that you go to, depending on then the influence of the programmer and stuff like that. There's so many variables. But CrossFit as a methodology, when you take it down to its bare basics and you take away the human ego, I think is a great methodology for covering all your, because they cover all your skills. I'm not going to
Yeah.
go through them now because I cannot say them all. But they cover plenty of skills. It's 10 or 11 skills. What is it? Is it 10 skills?
10 key physical skills.
10
Yeah.
key physical. Do you know?
Yes.
Go on then. Let's go. Okay. No. Okay.
know.
But the point is, what we're trying to get is, because of the human ego, that's what takes CrossFit away from being, say, prepared. Because I think CrossFit covers everything from your cardiovascular health. It covers your basic total body movements. So it gets you able to do these things like pick up your kids, maybe throw them in the air. You know, all these sort of movements that aren't your day to day. But that's what essentially the way up is here when you're talking about CrossFit Verdin building resilience for life. Because resilience for life is basically about not being a pussy. That's basically the thing. You want to be able to do everything as long as you possibly can. And CrossFit kind of gives you some of that ability because it gives you exposure.
Definitely.
So
one thing I want to say in defense of CrossFit is one of the things that they preach and advocate is regularly trying and playing new sports, which no one does. And I think the huge benefit of that is actual variation and different types of movement, learning different skills. And if all you do is CrossFit, you are becoming specialized around the CrossFit movements.
Yeah.
But they're like, I think it is in one of their original journals. That's one of the principles, that you should be regularly trying and playing new sports, and that's hugely beneficial.
So I'll pull them up. The 10 components of fitness. Number one, cardiovascular respiratory endurance. So the ability of body systems to gather, process, and deliver oxygen. So basically, cardio, right? Stamina, the ability of body systems to process, deliver, store, and utilize energy. Strength, flexibility, power, speed, coordination, agility, balance, and accuracy. When was the last time you did say balance in a CrossFit class? And maybe accuracy. Did you throw anything? And this is where obviously accuracy can be in loads of different things, but I'm just saying, so like and agility is another one. There's certain components which I think have got forgotten in a lot of CrossFit classes, and that's not necessarily the problem. That's just, I think, the competitive side. But then when you look at the games, this is one thing Dave Cascio is very good at. He does cover all those movements a lot of time in most things. They're not always they're a spectacle, and he does nearly always cover them. And that's I think the thing is being able to do those 10 physical skills will help you in life for what
Yeah.
the task that comes at hand. So
Yeah. If it was as broad as that, if it was just work on these 10 key physical skills, however you choose to, then I think it would be better. But because it has become focused around the standard gym exercises, the specialization does have a trade-off against general physical preparedness. Because if you just went after those 10 things in a broad brush way, however you chose to, like today we're going to work on accuracy and agility, and we're going to come up with some speed and agility work, shuttle runs between cones, passing and catching balls, which looks a lot more like sport. I think that's a lot more beneficial than just snatching and wall balls. It's the only two things that jump out for accuracy and coordination off the top of my head,
no,
majorly.
I think 100% right there, and I think, but a lot of the time, we're not saying this is all CrossFit boxes either, and
No.
a lot of the time people are restricted by space, which isn't necessarily as, again, if you're in a small box doing agility drills, like it's going to be a problem with classes. Obviously, you're going to have to cap things. There's ways around it, but most of the time you work with the space that you have, and maybe some of the skills might get missed off or not done as much, and maybe save to the weekend where not everyone comes and they can get outside and those type of things. So there is reason about it. But to link back to the question, CrossFit versus building resilience for life, it's a pretty good thing to do if you do it as CrossFit originally intended and cut the ego. So, but I think that has finished off this Q&A. We really appreciate everyone that spent the time to enter a question and give us all these wonderful things to discuss about. So thank you very much for that. If you did have a question that we didn't cover today, do give us a message on Instagram at lunge.lift, or contact either Ash or myself on Insta. Find all our information in the comment box down below. But apart from that, thank you very much for your time. I hope you did get something from this. If, as always, you did enjoy it, please share it with someone that you think will enjoy it as well. If you didn't enjoy it, but just think you should share it. If not, please just share it. Just please keep sharing. It's helping us grow. We really appreciate it. That is the only
We'd like
way
you to share it.
Yeah, that's the only way we're going to grow. So thank you very much for everyone that does share our stuff. We really appreciate it. I don't think I can say share any more times. But thank you very much. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Ash. And we'll see you next week.
Thanks, guys.
Share.